Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight, carjackings in Cook County have increased 44% since last year. Sheriff Tom Dart is here to talk about what's being done to address it.
Whatever happens because of that manpower issue, that falls at the mayor's doorstep.
The police union president predicts a shortage of Chicago police officers starting this weekend. Our Spotlight Politics team on that and much more.
Once we're done with the extraction, we get the viral RNA in these tubes.
How a UIC lab is tracking COVID-19 hotspots by testing Chicago area wastewater with plans to expand statewide.
A new movie inspired by the 1987 hijacking of WTTW and WGN's airwaves.
You know, it feels organically whole, that we're doing what we love.
And Joffrey Ballet dancers return to the stage. We have the first look. But first, some of today's top stories. The U.S. Attorney's Office announces federal gang charges in connection with last year's murder of a local rap artist. Prosecutors are charging 5 alleged gang members with racketeering, accusing them of participating in a criminal organization responsible for the murder of Carlton Weekly, who went by the name of FBG Duck. The murder occurred August 4th of last year in the Gold Coast. 2 other victims were shot in that incident, and no arrests were made at the time.
We were able to establish evidence to indicate that there was a racketeering enterprise here that was involved, and this murder was done in furtherance of that, and so federal charges were appropriate.
Mayor Lori Lightfoot has recommended an interim CEO at the Chicago Park District to take the place of recently resigned former CEO Mike Kelly. Rosa Escareño, the city's former Commissioner of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection, is Lightfoot's pick to take the spot for the time being. Lightfoot says Escareño is the, quote, right leader for this moment to bring confidence back to the Park District. Escareño was approved by the Park District Board while it searches for a permanent replacement. Several powerful members of City Council could be violating state law. That's according to a new Inspector General report. The report found that alderpeople who led powerful committees on City Council used employees of those committees to do work in their wards. That could violate a state law that requires governmental agencies to spend taxpayer funds in accordance with policies approved by elected officials. The review looked at several committees, including Budget, Economic Development, Finance, Workforce Development, and Zoning. In response, those City Council members denied that they were doing anything to violate state law. Chicago's e-scooter pilot program could soon become permanent. A City Council committee approved a plan to allow the scooters to return to city streets this spring. The proposal would allow up to 6,000 shareable scooters from 3 firms that participated in the city's pilot program and would allow those scooters to expand downtown and on the 606 trail. Those spots were off limits during the pilot. The full City Council is expected to take up the proposal tomorrow. And reflections are pouring in today on the life of Chicago historian and civil rights icon Timuel Black, who died at the age of 102. Black is a World War II veteran who worked closely with Dr. Martin Luther King and helped elect the city's first black mayor, Harold Washington. Former President Barack Obama offered condolences, writing, quote, "Tim was a testament to the power of place and how the work we do to improve one community can end up reverberating through other neighborhoods and other cities, eventually changing the world." And we'll have more about Timuel Black a bit later on the show. And up next, which parts of the city are seeing the most carjackings? That and other findings from the Cook County Sheriff's Office, so please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Carjackings in Cook County are on pace to be the worst in 2 decades. According to the Sheriff's Office, carjackings have increased by nearly 44% this year compared to the same period last year. In March, A task force was formed by the Chicago Police Department, the Cook County Sheriff's Office, and the Illinois State Police, along with other law enforcement agencies, to try and put the brakes on carjackings. Joining us now with more is Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart. Sheriff, welcome back. So what prompted the county to create this database that you all have made?
You know, we've been partnered up with CPD, who's been doing an incredible job in this. And the point I always try to make, Brandis, is that, yeah, this is horrible, but it's going on all around the country. I mean, whether you're talking about Minneapolis, where it's gone up 500%, New York has gone up like 80%. It's happening everywhere. It's horrible. And so it's difficult for all the departments. But the notion was the first thing we really need to do is, in addition to obviously solving the crimes, is to get the data so we can start analyzing who's doing it, where they're occurring more often, and then we can develop strategies.
And how was this data collected? Was it based on reports?
Yeah, you know, Chicago already had great data, so that was just a question of taking all that and putting it into dashboard form. But for suburban Cook County, we knew that they were also being plagued by this as well, and that was all over the board. Some departments had really good data, others did not at all, and so it took us a while to bring it together. And in doing that, we have really a complete picture of the county now.
And Sheriff, you said, you know, that this is up all over the country by as much as, would you say, 500% in some cities. But what do we know about why carjackings are up so much this year?
You know, people have been attempting to come up with that explanation, and there's a myriad of them. You know, people do mention COVID and some of the issues with that, because over half of the carjackings are done by juveniles. And during COVID, you know, so many of the after-school programs, so many of them, school itself were canceled, and so there was less for kids to do and a lot of idle time. So that was part of it. But there was other dynamics coming into play too. I mean, think about it for a second, Brandis. And not too long ago, if you had an individual with a mask on come anywhere near you, you knew trouble was afoot. Now everyone has a mask on, so it makes it, you know, people put their guard down. But more importantly, as far as trying to arrest and prosecute people, it's much more difficult because the norm is everyone wears masks. So there's a load of factors coming into play here. But now, you know, having data, we're able to make a better effort at it, and we're seeing results too, Brandis, and we're recovering cars at a much higher rate than we had done just a year ago. And a big factor is too that we've cut in time the amount of time the car is actually gone. So we've cut in half the amount of time it takes for a car to be recovered, so it can't be used in a crime then during that, obviously.
Okay, so we have a heat map, basically, that shows that the west side is the epicenter of carjackings this year, west side of Chicago, and obviously a little bit of surrounding area. And, of course, we know that the CPD has formed a task force that's included your office. What kind of information are you sharing between agencies?
Literally everything. And part of it has been very helpful in ways that I don't know if we fully appreciated at the time too, because we're getting much more live time information. But in doing that, as we all know, car chases are something that can go dramatically wrong in a hurry. So by looking at the data, we were able to find a lot of the patterns so that we knew when we'd have our task force, you know, different departments adding much more personnel, when to have that activated, because we couldn't do it around the clock because all of us are stretched very thin, but also when to have our helicopters up. And Brandis, we've had numerous cases where in the past you would have had to call off because you can't pursue the vehicle. The helicopter followed the vehicle and there was someone at the other end waiting for them to make the arrest. So those type of things have been very, very helpful, but we have a long way to go. And I can't emphasize enough, Chicago, the federal agencies, the state police, we're all working together on this one, and it is very vexing.
So, like you said, you've learned some information from this data, and according to that database, carjackings occur more often on Tuesdays. The west side, as we said, is a hotspot. 2/3 of the victims have been men, and the most targeted vehicle is the Toyota Camry. What other patterns have you all noticed?
You know, it was interesting because once we started looking at what cars were targeted, not only does it give an individual reason now to have your guard up if you have one of those cars, but why were they targeting that cars? For the Camrys, it was because it seemed as if, because there's so many of them, it was easier then to subsequently use in a crime. Whereas the second car was a Jeep Cherokee, I believe it was. And that one, it was more because those were ones that were targeted for secondary sales. And so we were able to start developing that. We had better ideas on whether or not there was crews that were operating. And Brandis, the one thing I can't emphasize enough to you, it goes from the juveniles who by and large are doing it for joyrides with guns, but with guns that scare people to death, rightfully so, to the other end where it's very professional and they are wildly sophisticated with their fobs and reprogramming that, where they can walk onto car lots and they steal cars right off the lots because they have fobs that open doors and start cars up.
Okay. Last month, we know that Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle said that 2 suspects tried to carjack her security in front of her Hyde Park home. What other, you mentioned, being able to use the helicopter. What other kind of tactics are you and the other law enforcement agencies deploying to stop these carjackings?
The big thing, to be honest with you, Brandis, was the fact that once we found the dates, and that's moved around a little bit, but then we adjust as well. Once we found the dates and times that were the ones that were being, where the most people were being victimized, we were able to concentrate our forces on those days. And I can't emphasize enough to you, our department, all the departments, CPD, State Police, we're making arrests now. So we're making more recoveries, definitely. We're making more arrests. Definitely. So we're seeing some of that, and that's all being driven by us having better ideas on where, what types of cars, and when this is occurring.
Sheriff, we also mentioned that 2/3 of the victims have been men. I don't know if that was surprising that more victims were men than women, but also, what is your advice to motorists to avoid a carjacking, but what they should do if it looks like they're about to be a victim?
The one thing that you tell people over again, you can always get your property back. You cannot save your life. Fighting these off is not a good idea. Give people your car. I've had this very discussion with my own children who are just starting to drive. You start with that, but while you are driving, you just have to be very aware, which is counter to the culture we're in right now. Right now, people, in spite of it being illegal, are constantly on their phones. They're looking at emails or looking at texts and things like that. And you set yourself up to be more of a victim if you're not engaged. So you really have to be on your toes more. And it's sad to say that, but you should be anyways. And certainly you shouldn't be on your phone.
Sheriff, a few weeks ago, switching gears just a little bit, you filed suit against the Illinois Department of Corrections over about 500 or so detainees who are in your custody, who should be in the state's custody, but your petition was denied. What does this mean for the jail? Do you have any other recourse?
I wish we did, Brandis, because this is something where we've exhausted everything. This has been going on for a year and a half now, so it isn't as if it's just happened for a couple days. For over a year and a half, at one time we had over 1,000 people we were sitting on. And to put that in perspective, that means I have to open up buildings that have long been closed, and then I have to ask my staff, or mandate my staff, not ask them, they have to stay after work. They have to do an additional shift. And so there's a high burnout factor on my staff that already it's a very difficult job as it is. Then with all the COVID mitigation things that we do make it even more difficult. And now I'm asking people, telling people that you can't go home to whatever event you might have had set up because we have to watch a building that should be closed because the State Department of Corrections, or Illinois Department of Corrections, won't take people that there's no discussion. They all know legally they're not supposed to be with me, but they're saying because of mitigation issues, which I find so perplexing because everyone says, things are under control, things have dropped, we've got vaccinations going on, all the rest of it. Well, if that's the case, why am I still sitting on about 600 people, which represents, Brandis, about 1/10 of my population here?
Okay, that's substantial. I think IDOC has said that they are trying to take them as they are able to, but of course this is something that I'm sure you'll keep us informed on. Sheriff Tom Dart, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Brandis. Thank you.
Up next, a look at how testing wastewater can help track COVID hotspots. Stay with us.
Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
Throughout the pandemic, many people have been keeping a watchful eye on COVID-19 numbers, in particular how many positive tests are coming back each day. But the not-so-fun nasal swab isn't the only way to track coronavirus in a community. For the past year, a UIC lab and its partners have been tracking the virus that causes COVID in wastewater. And joining us to explain how that all works and how the data is being used are Commissioner Kimberly Dubuclet of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. That's the agency that manages much of Cook County's waste and stormwater, was an early partner in providing water samples to the UIC lab. And Rachel Paretsky, an associate professor of biological sciences at UIC who leads the wastewater surveillance effort. Thank you both for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So, Professor Paretsky, I'll start with you first. Why is testing wastewater a useful way to monitor how COVID is spreading?
Yeah, because good question. It's because testing is limited. There's limited access to testing. Not everybody gets tested. Testing takes time. As many of us know, it could take 2 days to get results, and not everybody has access to it. The other thing is people don't get tested, maybe only get tested if they have symptoms. And wastewater, you can capture the entire community, not necessarily people who are just symptomatic or just seeking out tests.
And Commissioner Dubuclet, what kind of data have public health officials been able to glean from these samples?
Well, first, thank you for having me, Paris. And I just want to take 10 seconds to tell you what the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District does and why this is important to us. We're an agency that was founded over 130 years ago, and we are tasked with making sure our fresh water supply stays safe by managing wastewater and stormwater and protecting our freshwater supply, which happens to be the Great Lakes, or more specifically Lake Michigan. So when we are processing the wastewater, if we can identify pockets of where some of the virus is forming, we can do our part in helping to end this pandemic.
All right, so Professor Paretsky, tell us exactly how this works. You take a sample of wastewater, I don't know, in a sewer, and then test to see for traces of COVID-19. How does it work?
Exactly. So we've been partnering with MWRD since the start. MWRD has been a really early adapter of this since really March 2020, when the pandemic began here. And so we get samples from the water reclamation facilities that MWRD manages around the city. We also have a couple of sewer locations. We have some congregate living facilities. We're sampling at O'Hare Airport, a number of sites around the city. So it depends on the sample. We either get wastewater or sewer samples, and we bring it back to the lab and we look for the RNA, which is the genetic material of the virus that causes COVID, and we quantify that. So we get numbers of how much there is in the wastewater samples.
And
if I could just add to
go ahead,
that,
Commissioner. Go ahead.
COVID-19 is detectable in human waste several days prior to symptoms. So, when that happens, if we can identify these outbreaks before people even have symptoms, it helps us to really isolate where some of these outbreaks may occur.
Professor Paretsky, is there an example of an area where you were able to detect spread because you were, looking at the wastewater?
Yeah, I don't want to call out specific locations, but definitely we work directly with the public health agencies, IDPH and CDPH. And when we see trends that there's an uptick in the number of cases, we notify IDPH and CDPH who will deploy various mitigation strategies, try to ramp up testing, accessibility, vaccination. And so, yes, the public health agencies are using this data and responding.
And Commissioner Dubuclet, what else do you monitor? I mean, obviously you're monitoring the river, as it's being cleaned up from feces. So what else does MWRD monitor?
So we monitor the cleanliness of the river. We test for fecal matter with the partnership we have with an organization called H2 Now. And as your viewers probably already know, with the reversal of the Chicago River flowing away from Lake Michigan instead of into Lake Michigan, it helps when we have these CSO days from wastewater flowing directly into our lake.
And Professor Paretsky, once COVID dies down, hopefully soon, what other things can your lab test for in partnership with MWRD like this?
Yeah, we already have a partnership right now with MWRD where we're working on a pilot study with folks at the University of Florida, and we're looking for drug metabolites, opioids in wastewater. But we can test lots of different viral, bacterial pathogens, antibiotic resistance, a lot of different things that are public health threats like influenza. wastewater-based epidemiology has been used historically for things from polio to to some of the things that we're looking at now. So hopefully this will be a useful program ongoing once we get over COVID.
Commissioner, is this the kind of thing that MWRD wants to continue doing with public health agencies or universities, the kind of thing it can continue doing beyond COVID?
Oh, yes, absolutely yes to both of those questions. And one of the things that we try and do as a public service to our residents of Cook County, to that earlier point, is to really let our residents know that they should not be flushing prescription medicines down the toilet, because we cannot filter and clean those out. And so to Rachel's point, if they find that in our wastewater, and it could certainly end up back in our fresh water supply. And so it's really important to make sure that that public message gets out to our constituents. And to answer your question, yes, we do look forward to having other partnerships with other agencies across the country.
All right, wastewater, very useful for research on a number of fronts. And our thanks to Kimberly Dubuclet and Professor Rachel Paretsky. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And up next, remembering historian and civil rights activist Timuel Black. So please don't go away.
I come from a people that not only found a way to survive through the most horrific circumstances, but they thrived.
I could not save one of the boys of color in my own life. If my family could be exposed to this horror, then really it could happen to anyone. We are truly all in this together.
And there's much more ahead on the program, including our Spotlight Politics team and details on a new report or new reports from the Inspector General's office. But first, legendary Chicago historian and activist Timuel Black died today at the age of 102. Just a week ago, we learned that Black had entered in-home hospice care as a fundraising page was established to help his wife Zenobia cover the cost of it. I had the honor of walking down memory lane with Black nearly 3 years ago as he marked his 100th birthday. Here's a look. Though many who are lucky enough to reach the age of 100 become forgetful, Timuel Black is not one of them. He still recalls clearly exact addresses
at 6230 Vernon
and exact dates.
December the 4th of 1955.
From more than half a century ago. It's fitting that a man who would make his living as an historian would live to see so much of it. Black's family migrated to Chicago from Alabama in 1919 when he was less than a year old. Growing up in the notorious Black Belt, he recalls the rules his family was instructed to follow to avoid trouble.
Don't spit on the sidewalk. Don't talk too loud.
He attended Burke Elementary and DuSable High School. Later, the bombing at Pearl Harbor interrupted his 23rd birthday. While serving in Europe during World War II, a visit to Buchenwald concentration camp would cement his passion for working to make the world better.
So I saw Buchenwald, where human beings had been exterminated, systematically burned.
Black went on to college at Roosevelt University, then earned a master's degree from the University of Chicago before becoming a teacher. Then he heard a voice on television in 1955.
He articulated for me the way we felt, the way we had felt in the combat of World War II, but continued to be good Americans.
Black would work with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he came to Chicago, and he helped organize the Chicago contingent who went to Washington, D.C. for the historic March on Washington.
The attitude which had been inspired by my mother and father that a change is going to come, the door is going to open, be prepared to walk in. That attitude of optimism that I inherited from childhood continued throughout my life.
Working with King wouldn't be his last chance to help open another history-making door. Though he ran and lost his own race for Chicago alderman, he did help Chicago elect its first Black mayor, Harold Washington.
I mean, he was a go-to source. He was part of Harold Washington's inner circle. He was one of the guys that went out and got the money, that got the registered voters, that got the clout to help get him elected. Even then, he was a wise old man in politics.
Political columnist and analyst Laura Washington calls Black a Chicago treasure. She recalls a trip to Senegal and Mali in Africa years ago when they both taught at city colleges.
To be able to connect our lives in Chicago and the discrimination and racial injustice that we were struggling with then and now with that history back in Africa.
Black is a consummate teacher with knowledge that comes not only from his research, but also his life.
So he can talk to you about Martin Luther King and why he came to Chicago and what he did here and the impact. And it's not just what he's telling the kids in the classroom, it's what he lived. He can tell you about Harold Washington, he can tell you about Carol Moseley Brown, all the major cultural and political moments in our history, he was there for.
Another moment he was there for.
Hello, Chicago!
Seeing the country elect its first Black president, Barack Obama.
Barack Obama reached out to him when he was just a community organizer because everyone said, you go to Tim.
Have a feeling of great satisfaction, and at this point, a sense of fulfillment. As the end of time comes, I feel satisfied that I have lived a happy, productive life for myself and for others.
And among the condolences coming in today, Reverend Jesse Jackson called Black, quote, a great teacher and a tall tree in the civil rights forest. Congressman Bobby Rush said, quote, Tim's enthusiasm as an author and educator was inspiring, and his impact is utterly incalculable. His wife of 40 years, Zenobia, says Black's decline was rapid after entering hospice last week. Now, that fundraising page that we mentioned earlier, it has reached more than $112,000. No funeral arrangements have been announced just yet. And we'll, of course, have more on the life and legacy of Timuel Black on Chicago Tonight Black Voices this Saturday at 6:30. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, we'll talk with a lead actor in a new movie inspired in part by the 1987 hijacking of WTTW and WGN's airwaves.
Whatever happens because of that manpower issue, that falls at the mayor's doorstep.
And a war of words is escalating with the Chicago Police Union that's threatening short staffing over the mayor's vaccine mandate. Our Spotlight Politics team breaks it down.
You know, it feels organically whole that we're doing what we love.
And Joffrey Ballet dancers return to the stage. We'll have that first look. But first, some more of today's top stories. Chicago Public Schools says teachers and other staff will not be barred from returning to work if they're unvaccinated if they agree to weekly COVID testing. The deadline for teachers to be vaccinated is this Friday, and the district had previously said that those who didn't receive the COVID shot would be told to stay home. The district's reversal comes after both the Chicago Teachers Union and SEIU locals sent a letter to the mayor and school CEO Pedro Martinez saying the city was unfairly enforcing the vaccine mandate. CTU says nearly 90% of its members are vaccinated. And Chicago-based Boeing has joined a growing list of major companies requiring employees to be vaccinated or face termination. The aircraft manufacturer has given workers a December 8th deadline to comply or receive an approved reasonable accommodation, such as a disability or a sincerely held religious belief. The company says the move is necessary to comply with the president's vaccine mandate, which applies to employees of government contractors as well as federal workers. And First Lady Jill Biden continued her trip through the Midwest today with a charla, or chat, in observation of Hispanic Heritage Month. Biden and Education Secretary Miguel Cardona had a listening session at the Arturo Velázquez Institute in Little Village this morning and heard about the experiences of different members of the Latino community.
I'm a daughter of immigrants. My family uprooted themselves from Panama, and we rooted ourselves in the south side of Chicago. We all know the south side of Chicago is certain areas are predominantly black. So you have an Afro-Latino family rooting themselves in the south side of Chicago but don't speak English. So we had a unique challenge.
And now to Paris, and a new film inspired by a bizarre moment in Chicago television history. Paris.
Thanks, Brandis. Longtime WTTW fans may remember that back in 1987, our airwaves were hijacked by an unknown TV pirate who took over our signal during the Doctor Who show. Now, luckily, something like that could never happen again because of all the advancements in technology. Don't worry, our broadcast has not been taken over again by that Max Headroom lookalike. And kids, you can ask your parents about Max Headroom. That video was, in fact, from the original incident, and now nearly 34 years later, it's inspired a new film debuting tomorrow at the Chicago International Film Festival. Joining us to talk about the film called Broadcast Signal Intrusion is lead actor Harry Shum Jr., who you might recognize from his roles in the show Glee and the film Crazy Rich Asians. Harry Shum, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Perez. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. And so, as I understand, it's loosely based on that 1987 series of incidents, and then it's a bit fictionalized. So then what goes on to happen in the film?
Yeah, so it's inspired by that incident. I play an archivist, a film archivist, that video archivist that basically stumbles on these intrusions and starts to find out that there's a darker conspiracy that is somewhat connected. He thinks that it's connected to his recent wife's death. So he goes down this rabbit hole and meet an array of characters, and we get to see if he either finds more of himself or at least what has happened to his wife.
And we mentioned at the top, fans of Glee know you very well, know your character there. What drew you to this particular script?
I mean, look, you look at those intrusions. It's eerie, but also in some ways you kind of laugh at it because it's unsettling. So you don't know how to feel about it. And I think the script definitely had a lot of that. And while just going on this fun ride where you're constantly trying to figure out if he's going to get closer to the truth, and Chicago is just also, it lured me to, because it's so photogenic. It's such a great, beautiful place that also, I got to also play in this era that I never got to play in before in the late 1990s.
Yeah, the 80s and 90s. Let's look at a clip from the film where your character first sees the Max Headroom clip.
I think a minimal amount of governmental participation.
You mentioned enjoying filming in Chicago. What was your research like for this, and did it draw you any closer to any conclusions about the actual Max Headroom incident, which to this date is still unsolved, I think?
I mean, that's the crazy part of it all is, so there were actually, I thought, okay, maybe a couple thousand people know about this, but it's like millions and millions of people found this so intriguing that they, go into forums and actually put their theories out and do their own investigations. So going down that rabbit hole myself to do research was just fascinating to know that this left such an impression on so many people. And I think it's really why was this done, and was there any hidden meaning, hidden agenda? And I think that also says a lot about everything that we look at, like what is the hidden meaning behind certain things that especially hijacking and hackers, that kind of has inspired a lot of people to even know what that is and to see it as a danger or see it as a prank. So,
and obviously hacking, 30 years later is a much bigger thing than it was back then. So it's kind of foreshadowing. Are there any theories that you happened on that seemed interesting to you that explained what exactly happened?
I think a couple of theories that were interesting is a disgruntled worker, a disgruntled worker who knew about it. And then other theories were like, no, all you need is more powerful microwave to disrupt the signal, and anybody could have done that at that time. And it just also says like how these sophisticated equipment that everyone uses sometimes can be overpowered by something you buy at Radio Shack. And I think that's the argument between the two. It's like, what statements were people making? And I think with our movie, it to me, it's kind of exploring all of that, and also what can happen if you go explore in the truth that you might not want to find the answers to.
Disgruntled workers. I think we have some employees in the studio right now that might have been around at that period. Not insinuating anything. All right, so you filmed this about 2 years ago in Chicago. Whereabouts did you film?
We filmed all over in downtown, and we went in the outskirts of Chicago as well. But you know what we loved is, you know, there's a sequence where you find these like kind of basements that have that window, that kind of that bubble window that you can kind of see just people's footsteps, and there's something really unsettling about that. But I feel it's only particular to Chicago. I don't know the full history behind it, but there's moments in that where you're just seeing footsteps go, and I found shooting here, it just helped kind of the city itself was such a big character into this. Obviously, intrusions happened here, and then it was inspired by that, but also the actors and local crew were just incredible to help tell this story, and I'm excited to bring this back into the film festival.
Yeah, and Chicago's always a great backdrop, and I know that the crew members here are very proud working on these projects. So we mentioned the film festival. It's going to air tomorrow at the Music Box Theater, and what are the next projects for you then after this?
Yeah, I have, after this, I have a movie coming out for Netflix called Love Hard, November 5th. It's a romantic comedy Christmas movie, so those are always fun. And this one, it stars Jimmy O Yang and Nina Dobrev, and I get to play a completely different character as well, and kind of get in there and hopefully get some laughs, and it's really, really fun.
All right, we'll look forward to that, and we look forward to this film. And our thanks to Harry Shum Jr. Thanks so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, Paris.
And up next, our Spotlight Politics team on the police union's fight over Chicago's vaccine mandate and much more. But first, we take a look at the weather.
The Chicago Police Union says to expect staffing shortages starting this weekend as a result of their fight over the city's vaccine mandate. All that and much more with our Spotlight Politics team. Back again are Heather Sharon, Amanda Vinicky, and Paris Schutz. So, welcome back, everybody. Let's start with Fraternal Order of Police Union President John Catanzara, who told his members to buck the mayor's vaccine mandate, resulting in a mandatory suspension. Take a look.
If we suspect the numbers are true and we get a large number of our members to stand firm on their beliefs that this is an overreach and they're not going to supply the information in the portal or submit the testing, then it's safe to say the city of Chicago will have a police force at 50% or less for this weekend coming up. That is not because of the FOP. That is 100% because of the mayor's unwillingness to budge from her hard line. So whatever happens because of that manpower issue, that falls at the mayor's doorstep.
So Heather, does anybody have a handle just yet on how many officers have actually submitted their vaccine cards to the portal where they can submit that?
We don't know, and that is the question. The mayor and the city has said that they aren't going to talk about what percentage of city employees have said that they are vaccinated, but I think it's important to take a step back and realize Chicago is not the first city to impose a vaccine mandate on its employees, and in cities across the country, specifically in New York and California, there has been nowhere near the number of employees bucking the mandate that the FOP president seems to think that we're in store for here in Chicago. The city as a whole is relatively vaccinated, and you would assume that the police are part of that community, so it's represented in that data, but we will have to see, although several aldermen are warning tonight that they're very concerned about what this would mean. Even though Mayor Lightfoot stepped back from the mandate on Friday and said that you can stay employed and avoid discipline if you test for COVID twice a week on your own time at your own expense.
Just briefly, the superintendent was asked about this today. He was part of this press conference with the FBI, the superintendent of police, David Brown. He was not ready to touch it. Asked, are you concerned about staffing, particularly violence heading into the weekend? he was not ready to touch that and had no answers.
And Amanda, I imagine they're probably keeping a very close eye on that number of police officers who have or are submitting or showing their proof of vaccine through that portal. But Heather, the FOP still says, this is an overreach. Is this going to end up in court?
Probably, although I have to say that the ability, the legal authority of people to order vaccine mandates in cases like this, where it's a communicable disease, where it's airborne, it is pretty rock solid. We've seen colleges, have their vaccine mandates upheld, and we've seen vaccine mandates upheld in both California and New York by federal courts. So, anybody can sue. I don't know if it will be effective. And I think the question is, did Mayor Lightfoot, miscalculate by sort of offering this testing option when it seems to have not really been part of what the FOP is talking about? Although a couple weeks ago, the president said, hey, don't worry about it. Just take a test and you don't have to worry about the vaccine. I'm not clear why that's no longer an option that he's talking about. But the FOP and the mayor have been at odds since day one, since she's been in office. So this is more of the same, a different chapter, perhaps.
So meanwhile, John Catanzara, he released this video statement that we just saw a little while ago, on the same day that his predecessor, or a couple of presidents back, Dean Angelo, died from COVID-19 and complications. Paris, what are the optics of this for the FOP?
Well, let's first offer our condolences to the family of Dean Angelo. Comes from a family of cops. His son is a cop. He was president of the FOP from 2014 to 2017, a critical time when the Laquan McDonald, Jason Van Dyke case bubbled up and when there was the Police Accountability Task Force appointed by the mayor, basically to reform all oversight. And by the way, Lori Lightfoot headed that task force. And I know for a fact, despite them being on opposite sides of that, they liked each other, they grew fond of each other. Dean Angelo is an example of someone who fought for his ideals but could disagree without being disagreeable. So our condolences to him. And it's not just him. I mean, there's multiple police officers have died of COVID-19. The New York Times reports that COVID-19 is the #1 killer of police officers across the country. So yes, it does complicate the optics, and it makes it seem like the FOP president is using a little political opportunism here to create a fight, to create controversy, maybe to boost himself. But as Heather said, companies across the country, municipalities have imposed these mandates, and it seems like they're on solid legal ground to do it.
So, Amanda, Governor Pritzker is also dealing with lawsuits over vaccine mandates for school employees. He's calling these suits, quote, extraordinarily irresponsible. Who's suing, and what is their goal here?
I'll repeat a phrase that Heather used earlier, and that's that anybody can file a lawsuit. So there are a bunch of lawsuits, and frankly, there have been throughout the pandemic, be it from restaurants that didn't want to abide by state orders restricting the number of patrons they could allow in. Now we're facing pushback against vaccine mandates. So you've got firefighters that are saying that the executive order is illegal, that the government cannot force public employees, they fall under the healthcare mantle, to receive a vaccine. Also, a similar order in place for educators, for teachers. And so there's pushback all over the state. You also have parents that are suing over mask mandates. I mean, so really, pick a lawsuit, pick a place. There is something that the Pritzker administration is being brought to in court. There are a couple of points. Just number one, that again, the Pritzker administration, fairly solid ground in many ways, or at least has been able to fend off many of these lawsuits thus far, just due to the nature that this is a public health situation. That said, perhaps reaching the outer limits of that, we've done stories on this right of conscience law that might be used in some of these cases that perhaps Illinois is looking to amend. A lot has been done via executive order instead of statutory authority, the legislature really taking a backseat and letting the administration handle it. So that could perhaps change the dynamic in some of these newer, fresher cases. And then third, of course, there's this issue of negotiating with unions, something that the Pritzker administration is still in the midst of as he tries to handle a vaccine mandate for certain state employees.
Okay, so moving over, more to the city, Inspector General Joe Ferguson leaving at the end of the week after 12 years as the city's watchdog. Not going quietly, though, Heather. Ferguson reports that some alder people who get committee funds are instead using that money in their wards. So tell us what's going on here, and is that illegal?
Well, he says it might be, although the response from the alder people who are and were committee chairs says, nope, all of this money is being spent on personnel, so that makes it totally okay. But the Inspector General is pointing out that if you're a committee chair, you have about $200,000 extra, and maybe you have a committee that meets once a month, twice a month, and all of the rest of the time, those employees have time on their hand to do constituent services. And what do we know about Chicago? Chicago likes to re-elect aldermen who perform constituent service. That means get you a garbage cart. That means fill the pothole. And his audit released today says that that's not especially fair, because it means certain wards get different services based on the political clout of those aldermen. So he's sounding the alarm as he leaves out. And I think it's worth mentioning that he was given the authority to audit the city council committees and to scrutinize the aldermen's conduct back in 2019. And this has been a point of contention for many, many years. So he is leaving with quite a bang, and he's putting the aldermen on notice that this might have been the way that it's always been done in Chicago, but it might not be fair, and it might not be the best way to spend taxpayer dollars.
Heather, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I do want to clarify. We reported this earlier in the show. This is looking at committees up until 2019, so it doesn't implicate committee chairs who have taken their chairpersonship since 2019, so I don't want to insinuate that people who are currently chairs of committees like Budget and Finance are the target of this report. Is that correct?
That's correct. So this goes all the way back to 2015. Inspector General Ferguson also found that some committees don't even keep track of their attendees or their employees' attendance, and that it's all done except for one committee on paper records. And that seems pretty 20th century, according to the Inspector General, because if you're going to get paid by the city should be able to document what you've done for the city. But that's not how the City Hall works all the time anyway.
And Paris, back to you. You know, Ferguson also sounded the alarm about fire department response times. What's the issue there?
Well, this is something that he's audited several times, and he sounded the alarm on several times that the fire department is not measuring its average response times for ambulances or fire trucks to get where they need to go. The national recommendation is 5 minutes, 5 minutes from when you place the call to when the ambulance or fire truck arrives. And the thing is, there's just no data that the fire department has to analyze that, and fire department says that they're working on it, basically. But this is something that he's brought up time and time again, and it's useful to know, what the average time is so that they can improve their service if they need to.
Amanda, Illinois House Republicans say that the public hearings over reworking congressional maps are a sham. Do they have a point, or do they have sour grapes because they're in the super minority?
Yeah, Illinois Senate Republicans too, for that matter, and frankly, I think the answer is both. There is a bit of sour grapes frustration here, and that's in large part because this does have huge consequences for the party. But also, it's not just a partisan argument. You have pretty much every organization that has testified, partaken in these hearings, be it the quote-unquote good government groups and those that call for greater transparency, as well as many organizations. You look at groups such as, MALDEF, an ad hoc organization of various Black leadership groups, and that is we talked with the leader of this new organization yesterday, the Illinois African Americans for Equitable Redistricting. I mean, they say that these are a sham too. The League of Women Voters, pick an organization, and it is very apparent that while they are holding public hearings, that's just sort of cover. What is the actual work, what is happening is being done behind closed doors. And despite repeated questions from reporters and witnesses asking, will we at least get to see the maps before you vote on them, make them law? That is, in fact, not as what happening, and that is contrary to, frankly, the promises that Governor Pritzker made when he was a candidate.
Heather, Jill Biden, First Lady, was in Chicago for a 2-day swing. She appeared yesterday with Congressman Chuy Garcia. Is this an attempt to reach out to a member of the Progressive Caucus who objects to the president's, sort of shrinking priorities?
Well, it's interesting because Chuy Garcia is in lockstep with the Biden administration. It's really the so-called moderates who have put up a block to both the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the so-called Build Back Better $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill. So there was no doubt that there was a political calculation in sending the First Lady to Chicago to appear with Chuy Garcia. It's also Hispanic Heritage Month, and Chuy Garcia represents a primarily Latino district in Chicago where the Latino population is growing significantly. So this was, several birds, one stone. And she toured community colleges here in Chicago. Of course, she is the First Lady to continue to work, and she is a community college professor. So this was very much in her wheelhouse, as well as perhaps a little bit of a benefit for a congressional ally who has been stalwart in helping the president, even though the president is sort of under fire, it seems like all sides all day.
From the wheelhouse to the courthouse, a CEO pleads guilty to illegally funding former clerk, Cook County Court Clerk, Circuit Clerk Dorothy Brown's Women's History Month program. Now, Paris Brown has been investigated. People around her have been gone to prison for their dealings, but she has not. So bring us up to speed. What's going on there?
And the former Circuit Court Clerk, famous for those jeans days where employees had to kind of donate to her campaign fund and then wear jeans for the honor of wearing jeans to work. But so many folks around her have been indicted or are cooperating, and yet she has the moniker the unsinkable Dorothy Brown because she is not, that we know. But there have been reports that she's subject to federal investigation. In this case, it was the CEO of a company called Penn Credit, accused of bribery here, hoping that in return for these gifts and the fundraiser that he would get debt collection work from Dorothy Brown's office. So the interesting thing here is a deferred prosecution. The charges will go away after 2 years, and contingent on him cooperating in an ongoing investigation. What is that ongoing investigation about? Is that about Dorothy Brown? We don't know. So that's the interesting part of that. But again, so many folks in the periphery of Dorothy Brown's career there are in federal trouble.
And we've got just a few seconds left, but Heather, Alderman Patrick Daley Thompson gets a temporary trial reprieve. I get paid to talk with the prosecutor asking for a delay. Remind us briefly who he is and what he's charged with.
Well, he is the 11th Ward Alderman who happens to be the son and nephew of long-serving Chicago mayors. He is charged with filing false tax returns and then lying about it. He had been set to go on trial on Monday. He says he's determined to clear his name, and it's been only a few months since he's been indicted, but he will have to wait a little bit longer for that try because the prosecutor suffered a family medical emergency. So it could be November or even in 2022 before that trial takes place, because trials have to follow COVID rules, which makes scheduling very difficult at the Dirksen courthouse.
Yep, everything takes a little bit longer. I'm sure you'll be keeping an eye on that one as well.
I sure will.
Heather Sharon, Amanda Venneke, and Paris Schutz. That's Spotlight. Thank you. Chicago arts organizations have been returning to the stage, and now the Joffrey Ballet is ready for its 2021 debut. Arts correspondent Angel Edo gives us a look at the Joffrey's first in-person production since the pandemic, set to hit the stage at its new home away from home, the Lyric Opera House.
The Joffrey Ballet returns in Home, a celebration. As it welcomes back company dancers and instructors, it's also welcoming new choreographers, including Chanel De Silva. As one of Joffrey's 2020 Winning Works choreographers, the New York-based artist is back with a dance embodied after the old Negro spiritual Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, accompanied by Zoe Keating.
I said, whoa, what if I make a piece based around, not so on the nose, but based around the idea of swing low, that this chariot comes down, interacts with you, and sweeps you back up into the great beyond.
De Silva reimagined that chariot as angels instead.
The idea of the wings brought about this idea of angels, and what does that even mean? Where do angels come from? Do they exist here on earth with us all the time? Or are they heavenly creatures that come down and interact with humans? I tried to highlight the majesty of angels and the complexities of what it means to be human.
Now, De Silva describes the angels as messengers, guiding people through the human experience, or in this case, dancer Fernando Duarte.
There's angels that come across and I don't see them, and I just feel them like guiding, pushing me and nudging me in the right direction. She asked us the first day what it means to be an angel, or what does it mean to you to have a guardian angel? And I told her, I was like, you're my guardian angel because you came and you brought this piece, which is a gift. You selected me to dance and tell your story and through your movement, and I couldn't be happier.
But De Silva doesn't expect everyone to receive her work in the same way.
For me, when I make work, I don't so much want to tell my audience exactly how to feel or what the story is. I consider myself just someone who's asking questions via my art. So when you watch Swing Low, there's a lot of different interpretations of what's happening, which I love. And, you know, I feel like my job as a choreographer is to just use my art to investigate.
As for Home, a Celebration as a whole, Joffrey's artistic director, Ashley Weeder, tells me there is one moment he is looking most forward to about the dancers' return to the stage.
For every piece to feel the power of the orchestra and the power of the public, that we're all together sharing in the spirit of dance, it's pretty from the heart.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angelito.
Home, a Celebration, opens tonight and runs through October 24th. There are more details on our website. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night.
Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Will e-scooters be returning? City Council is set to vote on that and more.
Plus, the Chicago Children's Choir on their latest collaboration and 65 years of raising their voices. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.
Incredible, spectacular.
An abandoned quarry will be transformed into China's incredible ice world, complete with indoor ski slope. But nature and a global pandemic threaten construction.